December 3rd, 1999, Worcester, Massachusetts would become the site of one of the worst firefighting disasters our country has ever faced. That night would see 6 firefighters perish in an uncontrollable blaze. The fire that they responded to involved an abandoned warehouse with nobody inside and a rescue strategy that went horribly wrong. The Worcester Cold Storage and Warehouse Company building was constructed in 1906 and occupied one whole city block. The structure was 6 stories and measured 80 feet in height. Each floor was approximately 15,000 square feet. The cold storage warehouse was intended to be just that, essentially a large insulated structure that could store beef along its shipping route to the east. To achieve this goal, the builders applied 18 inches of tar-impregnated cork, polystyrene foam, and polyurethane to the 18-inch thick, windowless brick walls of the warehouse. This insulation would prove to be a highly flammable mix during the fire. In 1912, a large addition to the building was constructed, dividing the building in two with a thick party wall. Offices were also added to the second floor in a confusing layout, and the interior of most of the structure was a maze of meat lockers. These conditions resulted in a building that was difficult to navigate even for employees who worked there before it was abandoned in 1989. The department responding to this incident was the Worcester Fire Department. In 1999, the Worcester Fire Department held 75 to 105 firefighters per shift. Their resources consisted of 15 engines with 3 on reserve, 7 ladders, heavy rescue, hazmat, and scuba units. Their equipment were radios, pass devices, SCBAs with 30-minute tanks, and their training was 480 hours total, with 80 hours of hazmat training. All were required to have Firefighter 1 and 2 certifications, and both the engine and ladder units were trained for the Rapid Intervention Team concept. Sometime between 16:30 and 17:45 hours on that Friday evening, 2 homeless people who regularly squatted within the cold storage warehouse knocked over a candle. They were living within the office spaces on the second floor at this time, and the fire used the flammable construction materials of the walls of the offices to develop unnoticed. The 2 homeless people did not call for help, and the windowless exterior of the building allowed the fire to burn completely undetected for 30 to 90 minutes. An off-duty police officer who saw gray and white smoke coming from the roof of the warehouse was the first to sound an alarm at 18:13 hours. Shortly after the first call, an off-duty firefighter also saw the same smoke and called into the fire control that this was going to be a multiple alarm fire. The first units to arrive on scene were there 3 minutes after the first alarm. There were 7 units responding to the first alarm: engines 1, 6, 12, and 13, ladders 1 and 5, the district chief who would be incident commander number 1, and rescue 1 who would lose 2 of their men to the fire. Immediately, there was a lack of coordination amongst the units responding to this incident. The incident commander would arrive at 18:19, several minutes after the 6 units began searching the structure and establishing hose line on the interior of the building. Rescue 1 and ladders 1 and 5 had already split up and sent 2 men each into the interior of the structure from the roof. They were unaware of the number of floors in the warehouse because of the lack of windows and information. This resulted in them being unable to give their exact location within the structure as they made their way into the interior. When the incident commander arrived on scene, he called for building information and the layout of the structure. Unfortunately, there was no information to be found, and his men were already inside of a burning building. This meant that there was no way to locate men already on the interior by radioing from the outside. When a building owner adjacent to the structure tipped off the fire company that there could be occupants still inside, the chief decided to conduct rescue operations and these firefighters went deeper into the maze of the building.
Without proper pre-planning and inspection, no building information was available to the responding crews. The first alarm crew splitted into two-man teams. Half the crew looked for the fire extensions and the other half stayed outside to set up the apparatus. The first responding ladder sent two firefighters to the roof to conduct ventilation operations, while the other half joined the search for the fire extension. Fire was reported on the second and third stories of the building. The Interior Command ordered the first and second alarm crews to place attack lines in the second-story elevator shaft and to the second and third stories through the stairwell. 15 minutes into the fire, the Interior Command reported 2 homeless people are potentially missing. Rescuer 1 splits into 2-man team to conduct search and rescue operations and proceed to the top story. Due to the light smoke, no search ropes are used. However, conditions deteriorated. At the first head count, 20 minutes in, 2 members from 1 rescue are missing. The third alarm responding units are ordered to conduct search and rescue operations for the 2 missing firefighters, victims 1 and 2. Rescuer 1 activates their pass device 30 minutes in. Continued. Between 30 to 35 minutes, 2 firemen conducted search and rescue, which became disoriented and radioed that they are lost and running low on air. Others' crews were unable to locate them, victims 3 and 4. Engine 3 split into 2-man crews to conduct search and rescue operations. The final 2 victims from Engine 3 were not seen entering the building and did not make contact with command or anyone else on scene. It is to believe they joined victims 3 and 4. Roughly an hour in, a second head-up calls reveals 6 missing firefighters. Radio calls to the missing crew went unanswered. At this point, crews recognized the structural integrity of the building was compromised. Nearly an hour and a half in, a thermal image camera was developed to search for the missing firefighters. However, it quickly stopped working due to the heat. At the hour and 45 minutes mark, Interior Command orders everyone out of the building. The responders' crew switches from offensive attack, including search and rescue, to a defensive attack. Search and rescue operators would not resume until the fire was knocked down. The incident command was the last to arrive on scene for the first alarm. This created an uncoordinated effort amongst the firefighters. The fire was first spotted by Ladder 13 in the B building, from the first floor through the elevator shaft. Most of the other crews were in the A building. The majority of the crew resources were in and on top of the A building, and there was further confusion about where the fire was located, and the fact that the building was divided into 2 firewalls. Crew 1 was informed of possible building occupants at 1824 and decided to conduct rescue operations. Rescue 1 had a crew on floor 1 of the A building and on the roof of the structure, and began to do a floor-by-floor search from the roof down and the floor up. Rescue 1 did not locate any fires because of the firewall dividing the building. Additionally, due to not knowing number of floors in the building, the Rescue 1 crew coming down from the roof had no way of communicating what floor they were on with crew coming from the ground. Rescue 1 was reporting on no fire on the floor of the structure, while crews were attacking the fire on the second floor of the B building. Crew number 1 took Interior Command and passed off Incident Command to Crew 2 without having knowledge of the exact position of the crew with the structure. Crew advanced through the fire wall that divided the structure in half with hose line and created a strong draft when they opened up the heavy steel doors in the party wall. This action accelerated the growth of the fire by supplying more oxygen to the B building. This caused the condition of the entire structure to deteriorate, while Rescuers 1 was advising their way to the roof. Crew 2 called a third alarm at 1840, and the conditions on the entire second floor of the structure quickly became unstable. A crew from Rescue 1 was above the second floor at the time, but could not specify which floor they were on because they came from the roof down. Rescue 1 attempted to call for help, but radio traffic was too cluttered for their messages to be received. Ladder 2 and Engine 3 began searching for Rescue 1, 3 minutes after the call for help. All subsequent rescues attempts were made for Stairway 3 from this point on. Because of the confusion around the layout of the structure and the number of floors, all rescue efforts were limited to the A building. Ladder 2 and Engine 3 made their way to the 5th floor and became lost. The location of the missing firefighter never determined even after a 4th and 5th alarm were called. With additional resources, including thermal imaging, which failed due to the heat, the condition of the building was too unstable to advance more than 50 feet into the interior of the structure, and all the audible signals were drowned out by the sound of the flames. 5 to 2.5 inches of hose line were established and pumping up to 1250 GPMs on the fire. Resources attempts were being conducted from the opposite side of the structure at this time. The fire had advanced its way to the A building and was added by the party wall being breached. By 1958 hours, all 6 missing firefighters were pronounced dead and the building was evacuated.
Several problems existed stemming from command. Effective fire ground operations cannot be utilized without proper coordination from IC. Personnel were already entering the building from 2 ground entrances and the roof before the initial IC could assess the situation. Change of command occurred between the interior commander and the second arriving chief without a full and proper turnover. No proper building pre-plan report, the number of floors, the massive party wall separating the new and old addition, and the floor setups ultimately contributed to the 6 firefighters becoming lost. Issues existed with radio communications as well, as emergency disaster calls were clouded by excessive radio chatter. As we learned earlier, command was shifted from the interior commander who assumed initial IC to the second IC who arrived after firefighters were already inside the building. Incident command systems were not properly established, leading to confusion and a lack of communication between firefighters and officers. No safety officer would be appointed during the incident as the IC assumed both roles. Engine 1, 6, 12, and 13, ladders 1 and 5, Rescue 1, and Car 3 responded to the first alarm. Car 3 would assume initial incident command. Engine 2 and 16, Aerial Scope 2, and Car 2 responded to the second alarm. Car 2 would assume IC, and Car 3 would become interior command. Radio contact would only exist between working personnel to officers, and the officers to IC. All interior radio traffic had to be received by interior command, and then relayed from the interior command to incident command. Firefighters operated outside of view and hearing of their officers, further decreasing the ability for IC to account for all personnel conducting interior operations. To summarize, NEOSH recommends proper pre-planning of known fire hazards, proper utilization of ICS, following of standard operating procedures, and close crew accountability. Proper fire prevention efforts on the building had slipped the Worcester Fire Service. The Worcester cold storage and warehouse building was a known hazard to the community. Fire inspectors were known to get lost during routine inspections. However, no pre-arrival planning was conducted, leaving the responding crews clueless. Piping in the building had been ripped out, leaving fire suppression systems useless. No fire detection or alarms existed in the building, allowing the fire to grow for 30 to 90 minutes before crews were dispatched. The Worcester cold storage and warehouse fire is a prime example of where multiple safety problems accumulated to create the perfect storm. From this fire, we can only learn and educate firefighters going forward. The men who gave their lives that day will not be forgotten.